Dr. Evans, at the point we're at now, you have been provided with all the exhibits relating to the medical evidence of the children in this trial, haven't you?
Yes.
And so far as we know, you've had access to all the witness statements dealing with the medical aspects of the case.
As far as I know, yes.
As far as you know. And as the trial has been proceeding in front of the jury, you have been able to watch it, albeit from another courtroom, on the link.
Yes.
So you've been able to follow what has been happening?
Yes.
Your involvement in this investigation began in 2017, did it?
It did.
And it's continued over the years since then, hasn't it?
Yes.
At the moment you're giving evidence about babies A and B.
Yes.
And also some of the general issues relating to air embolus.
Yes.
You've prepared and provided a very large number of reports, inevitably, over the years, haven't you?
Yes.
And what you say about air embolus generally features across dozens of them, doesn't it?
Well, a number of them, yes.
Yes, a number of them then. However you like to put it.
Well, dozens is 24 plus.
It could well be dozens, actually, given the children you have looked at. The reports have covered particular children where it has been an issue in your view, haven't they?
Yes.
And they have also covered reports which have dealt with specific aspects of air embolus, haven't they?
Yes.
I was just checking that you mean literally, not a figure of speech.
No, literally dozens, my lord, but I'm grateful for checking that. It wasn't a figure of speech. With that in mind, could you tell us, what do you say are the features that support a diagnosis of air embolus?
Sorry, can you say that again? What?
What are the features?
Oh, right.
The characteristics to support a diagnosis of air embolus.
Right. The first is that it occurs in a patient of any age, where there is access to the circulation via an external line, in other words, an intravenous cannula. So there has to be some kind of access there, firstly. The second point, and the most important point, is that an air embolus will lead to a sudden and unexpected collapse. A patient otherwise stable, irrespective of age, otherwise stable, suddenly collapses, and by collapse I mean stopping breathing, change of color, cyanosis and bradycardia, in other words, reduced heart rate and death. And this occurs all of a sudden. There are additional features, and as with all of clinical medicine, you don't get all of these features in all of the cases. And as we've heard this week and last, the two major associated features are those of unusual skin discoloration, and I won't elaborate on that because I think we've explained that, and also the presence of air in the great vessels, or air in various parts of the body. It could be the heart, could be the vein, could be the aorta. So those are the compounding features that lead to a diagnosis of air embolus. The other point, which is also important from a clinical point of view, is that this collapse occurs not only out of the blue, but there is no other explanation that fits with the diagnosis of collapse. The final point is that, and this applies obviously to patients in hospital, is that resuscitation is unsuccessful. Because of the way doctors are trained, resuscitating patients is part of our bread and butter, so the procedures that we use to resuscitate babies, children, adults, are well known, well drilled into us. But when the resuscitation does not work, leading to the death of your patient, then that adds to one's confirmation of the diagnosis of air embolism.
Thank you. Just in terms of your position with it, can I ask, when did you last see a case of air embolus in clinical practice?
In my 30 years as a consultant pediatrician in Swansea, we had no cases of air embolus in the neonatal unit, and we had no cases of air embolus with which I was involved in the neonatal unit or anywhere else. In relation to, which is something I'm pretty proud of, by the way, in relation to Swansea generally, one of the great tragedies that occurred to us in Swansea is a baby who suffered an air embolus as a complication of what should have been a routine surgical procedure. This was a baby of a few weeks old who was having an operation for a condition called pyloric stenosis. Part of the surgical procedure is making a nick in the lower aspect of the stomach without actually causing a perforation. What the surgeon does is ask the anaesthetist to inject air into the stomach to ensure there is no leak. It's routine. For one reason or another, instead of injecting air into the stomach, He attached the syringe to the intravenous line, injected air into the circulation. The poor baby collapsed there and then. And resuscitation was unsuccessful, and the baby died. As you can imagine, this was absolutely awful. It was haunting. It led to a trial, a criminal trial, etc. And I think it's something that, despite not having anything to do with this particular baby, it's something that you never, ever forget.
Understandably.
So that's the closest I've got to a baby with air embolus. It is that rare and unusual.
In fact, that's something you refer to in one of your general reports, isn't it?
Yes.
You refer to it in
It's awful.
a report of the 3rd of June 2019. For those who are keeping a note, if it's relevant, it's page 475 of the statement. And in that case, the baby collapsed very quickly. Is that correct?
Again, I have not seen the report. But yes. Yes.
And resuscitation was not successful, and the baby died.
Yes.
As it happens, there's certainly nothing you put in your report on that occasion, Dr. Evans, suggesting there was any kind of discoloration that you have identified that was linked to that.
I have not seen the report. I have not been involved in any way with this case. All I know is it happened.
You're unaware of any discoloration or indication?
I have no idea.
So, in terms of your clinical experience, there's no what could be said to be hands-on experience of diagnosing or encountering air embolus, is there, or how it presents?
Absolutely not. And I think that's something I'm very relieved and pleased about, actually.
We understand that, but in terms of how you're describing what you see in this case, you're not comparing that against any clinical, personal experience, are you?
Good heavens, no.
No. In reaching conclusions about air embolus in this case, would it be right to say that, to some extent, you've relied upon what could be called a diagnosis of exclusion?
Yes.
And a diagnosis of exclusion is where a clinician looks at what he or she considers to be the available alternatives.
Yes.
And having discounted those that appear to be available, is then left with one or two options, maybe just one. And so in that way they reach a diagnosis in that route.
Yes.
And that's a diagnosis of exclusion.
In this particular case, there is more to it than a diagnosis of exclusion because we know about the discoloration. I'm happy to discuss that with you. And we know about Dr. Arthur's reports about air in the great vessels. So therefore, when I formed my initial diagnosis, because I had reached the conclusion, I reached a diagnosis of air embolus without knowing about the discoloration. And we're talking about baby A.
In fact, I'm talking generally at the moment. I will be coming to baby A.
So in general, it's a diagnosis of exclusion. But if you then discover additional items of information, discoloration is one, air on X-ray is another, and as Dr. Owen Arthur said, you don't need abnormal X-rays to confirm the diagnosis. So that just simply firms up your diagnosis.
All right, so you're able to proceed. No hands-on experience. I'm just pointing that out. You're not comparing it with anything, but you're able to proceed by way of a diagnosis of exclusion. And you can look for supporting features where they exist. You've also sought to rely upon research into this area, where it's available, haven't you?
Right. It is quite important to say that, yes. Part of clinical practice is a term we heard last week, evidence-based medicine.
Yes, I asked Dr. Owen Arthurs about it, or Professor Owen Arthurs.
Evidence-based medicine basically has 4 tiers. One's own experience is one. Higher up is what you read in textbooks, and higher up still is what you read in medical peer-reviewed journals. The problem with air embolus is that you have to rely firstly on, well, very often on isolated case reports, one case here, one case there. You have to rely on the fact that medical teams are honest enough to disclose that a child under their care died of air embolus, because one tends not to spread news about the mistakes we make. And most important of all, I think, in this with regard to air embolus, as I said this morning, the paper we refer to most commonly is the one by Lee and Tanswell, 1989. There are very little new publications regarding air embolus in babies. That is not a criticism, that's a compliment. You can't produce research papers or publish papers on conditions that don't occur. And we have become obsessive, meticulous, throughout our careers in relation to avoiding getting air into the circulation of sick babies and sick children. So therefore, So it's not a matter of having to apologize for quoting research papers that are 30 years old or more, nor is it a weakness, I believe, in quoting papers that involve just one case. For instance, one of the papers I published was from Pakistan, I think, where they don't do post-mortems. So therefore, the assistance that we get in the situation of this nature from research papers is inevitably relatively limited.
What I just wanted to establish was that research papers play a part in what you do, and they do, don't they?
It does.
Before I move on, I just want to ask you about one thing you said. You said, "We don't spread news about the mistakes we make." Who is the we when you said, "We don't spread news about the mistakes we make"?
I think it's a royal we. It's a royal we.
Well, we is who?
It's a royal medical we. It's human nature, I think, to share information with your nearest and dearest as far as your medical colleagues are concerned. You refer to the coroner, as has happened in many cases here. So you deal with it in that way, and you have to run it past the health board, the health trust. But it's not something that you publish in the public press and media.
All right. So is it fair to say that people might be a little slow to acknowledge where they've made mistakes?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, when you consider a case that comes before you, and there's been a serious deterioration or a death, I was going to suggest to you there's a number of options or conclusions you can draw. These are just initial points. We will get to the detail of everything in a little bit, Dr. Evans. Where there is a serious deterioration or a death, that may be due to an identified medical condition. That's one option, isn't it?
That's correct, yes.
I'm suggesting these are all things you must keep in mind when you're in a position that you're in.
Yes.
They may be due to a medical condition that is currently known, but hasn't actually been identified in the proceedings, in the investigations associated with them.
Well, if it's not been identified, it can't be known.
You know, Dr. Evans, there is space sometimes for uncertainty in medical diagnosis, isn't there?
Yes. That's a different point altogether.
Well, is it the case that there may be a situation that is due to a medical condition that is known, but not identified?
Such as?
Well, for example, a genetic condition. Tell us about the genetic testing in this case, or metabolic testing.
Genetic conditions causing embolus, okay?
No, you ask me. I'm answering your question. Has there been genetic metabolic testing in this case?
As far as I know, no.
No, right.
But I am unaware of any genetic... For what it's worth, I am unaware of any genetic condition that would lead to...
So it's important to keep in mind a medical condition that is currently known, but may be currently unidentified.
It happens, yes.
Sometimes you have to keep in mind it may be due to a medical condition that is currently unknown. Sometimes?
Well, these are hypotheticals, aren't they?
Yes, they are. There may be a problem in care given that has played a part in what takes place.
In
the care that has been given or treatment.
Yes, that's a possibility.
That might be difficult to identify if people are slow to spread news about it, mightn't it?
No, it would be difficult to identify if a patient presents with, in a way they have never seen before.
It may be due to deliberate inflicted harm, of course.
Absolutely.
Sometimes the right outcome is to consider that ultimately it cannot be ascertained from the available evidence. It is unascertained.
That is a term I'm familiar with, yes.
Well, you have been appearing as an expert witness before the courts for many years, haven't you, Dr. Evans?
I have.
And you are familiar that pathologists, for example, will find the cause of death unascertained.
That is true.
Indeed, you surely will have had reports where you have found the explanation is unascertained.
That is correct.
So that's always a possibility, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I'm just looking at the range of where you can get to when you look at a situation, do you understand?
Yes.
Would you agree it's important not to focus disproportionately upon a conclusion of deliberate harm, if there's no direct evidence of it?
Would it? Can you say that again?
I'll rephrase it. It's important not to hurry to a conclusion of deliberate harm if there's no direct evidence, would you agree?
You never hurry to a diagnosis that has such serious consequences.
And would you agree that the fact there is an allegation of deliberate harm should not be the starting point when you approach a clinical pathological situation to form an opinion?
Absolutely.
When you were asked to review the cases and asked for your involvement in this investigation, you told us the NCA were the agency that contacted you. That's the National Crime Agency.
Yes.
Did they provide you with the theory that deliberate harm had been done?
No. By the time that the NCA got me involved in this case, I had prepared nearly 50 reports for police authorities on other issues, on top of all my other stuff with the family court, etc. So therefore I was someone who was known to them as someone who dealt with, with suspicious events. Clearly the fact that the police were involved, I would be a bit naive not to appreciate that somebody was concerned about what was going on. And, so they didn't tell me anything about what happened. All I was told was, and I think this was in the papers actually, all I was told was there's a hospital in Chester where lots of babies have died, and this is a hospital where 3 or 4 babies die per year, which is, about the average for a baby unit of that size. But somehow or other, over a very short period of time, they'd had far more deaths, which is a worry. Several of the deaths were unexplained, which is even more of a worry. Several of the deaths occurred in babies who were previously stable, which adds to the worry. And several of the babies who had collapsed, resuscitation was unsuccessful, which is even more of a worry. So therefore we had a constellation of worries here, and so the medical team got the police in. So that is how it is. And by the way, so when I went to see them, I said, look, just give me the clinical notes of all the babies within this window, this 12-month period. Give me the notes of all the babies who have died, all the babies who have collapsed, not died, notes of any baby, where something has happened where you can't explain it. So it had nothing to do with investigating a crime. It was investigating a clinical condition. It's quite important actually. It's different. All of my reports are based on investigating a clinical condition. My reports are clinical conditions. I'm not there investigating crimes. The police do that. I'm there because of my medical expertise to see if I can assist in forming an opinion regarding what's gone on. And I have done a number of reports where things were suspicious for police authorities elsewhere, where it was obvious to me that some child had sustained some kind of unusual accident, but it was an accident. And therefore the police were able to close the file and, that was that. So that happens as well. So it isn't that if I'm involved, we're going to end up with somebody being charged with a serious offense. So in this particular case, that's where we started from. The disadvantage that the Cheshire police had, and I had, at the beginning was that, these babies had just collapsed and we had no idea why. What I told them, and I think this is quite important from a diagnostic point of view, I said, look, if a baby collapses, something has happened. It might be the end result of an infection. It might be the end result of, a brain hemorrhage. It might be the end result of a collapsed lung. There are all sorts of reasons why babies collapse. But if I can get all the reports, I will work out a timeline for you. That's the way I did all of these reports. That's the way I do all the reports I do. I'll work out a timeline for you. Right, this baby was well, up until a particular time and then suddenly he crashes. Now, on the whole, babies don't do that. They don't suddenly crash. And on the occasion that they do, they deteriorate quickly, as we have heard already. You can resuscitate them quite easily. So therefore what I said was, look, I'll go through all these notes for you, and I'll identify every point where a baby has deteriorated. Okay? That's the first thing I did. The second thing I did, I said, right, let's see why these babies collapsed. Now, we will deal with this in other cases in this trial. There were a number of deteriorations where it was obvious why a baby had deteriorated. There was evidence of infection, evidence of a blocked tube, a collapsed lung maybe, pneumothorax. So...
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Evans. May I just interrupt to ask, are you saying this is everything you've been told when this began?
No, this is what I did. This is what I did.
If you just pause, I don't mean to be rude, but the question I asked was your state of mind, asking about what you thought when you were first approached by the NCA.
No, my state of mind was very clear, which I think is why I'm still in demand as an independent medical witness. My state of mind was very clear. Let's find out the diagnosis. Let's find out what on earth is going on. Nothing to do with, crimes or anything of that nature. Let's find out what's going on. Let's identify any specific collapse. Let's see if I can explain all of this. And there were occasions when I could explain it, and there were occasions where there was something that I found deeply suspicious. And, if we are speaking generally, Mr. Myers, there were incidents that I found disturbing. I don't want to talk about that today, because that's for other cases. So therefore, when I investigate a case, when doctors investigate a case, you are only talking about one case. So in my initial scrutiny, that is obviously didn't cover everything. In my initial scrutiny, I looked at 28 cases, and then they were followed by another 5. So there were 33 in all, and then the 2 insulin ones came later. So therefore, I looked at loads of cases. In certain cases, the reason why the little baby had died was very obvious. I recall there was one case where the baby was born severely asphyxiated, severe brain damage from birth, unsurvivable. There was another baby. There were other babies who had significant congenital malformations, incompatible with life.
I don't want to take you away from the topic, Dr. Evans.
Yes, but that's the way clinicians approach things. Okay? So it's quite important, I think, for members of the jury to appreciate that I was not investigating a suspect who was an individual who was suspected of inflicting harm on a baby. I was not doing that at all because, for the obvious reason, I was unaware of any suspect. The name Lucy Letby meant nothing to me. I didn't know any of these people. Air embolus had never crossed the radar of anybody in Chester as far as I knew. The other events that we've spoken about, none of that was remotely run past me. I was on the easiest position and the most difficult. Easiest in that I had a blank sheet. What on earth is going on here, Dr. Evans? That's for you. Helping the police with their inquiries, if you like, Mr. Myers. I had no idea. We had no idea, and therefore I relied entirely on the evidence I could see from the clinical notes, and applying my clinical experience to form an opinion as to the cause. So that is, that's how I did it.
Can I just ask you to answer this? I don't mean to be rude, but as directly as you can, Dr. Evans. Is there any possibility that you might have allowed the suspicion of harm when you were asked to look at these, to have led you to look for possible mechanisms in some cases?
No. I wasn't looking for harm. I was looking for a cause.
For example, when you were told the babies were stable and just collapsed, was that your starting point?
No.
Did you have telephone conversations with the officers of the NCA?
No.
None?
As far as these babies are concerned, it was having a chat with my contact at the NCA. Let's go to Chester. So I spoke to her and said, we don't know what is going on. Basically, nobody knew what was going on as far as I could tell. So I said, look, I can't tell what is going on. What I suggest is this is before I, if you like, accepted the instruction to do anything for Cheshire Police. What happened was, they got in touch with the NCA and I got in touch, and Cheshire Police rung me, I think, and I said, look, I'll come up and see you. So I'll come up and see you. So I drove up from Carmarthen, where I live, on a sunny day in July, and said, look, I'll come and see you. I'll come and talk to you. I don't know whether I'm of any use to you. All I want you to do, bring me a case, bring one case file, just to give me a sort of idea of what's going on here.
During the course of any discussion before you wrote the reports on baby A or baby B, was the expression air embolus used at any point?
No.
Not at all.
The first person who thought about air embolus in this particular case, as far as I know, was me.
Well, we know that we have heard already from Dr. Jayaram that the doctors at the hospital had already, it seemed one or more had turned their mind to that at some point during that period. We know that, don't we?
Do we?
You listened to the evidence yesterday.
Yes, but that was afterwards.
No, during the period after baby D. I asked Dr. Jayaram about it.
I can't remember that.
Well, if you can't remember, that's how the paper was raised with him. Do you remember that yesterday, going to the paper? Do you remember going to the research paper with Dr. Jayaram?
I remember that.
Yes. And my questions to him about going to look at this after the death of baby D in June 2015, and how he and his colleagues were talking about this, pulmonary vascular embolism.
But I knew nothing about any of this.
So when you had your chat with your contact at the NCA, did they not say at any point, the doctors there think maybe it involves air embolisms? Did they not give you that much of a steer?
They didn't give me any steer at all. And I need to compliment the NCA, they never give you a steer. They just tell you, look, you deal with the police. They are very good, straight people.
You do recall me asking Dr. Jayaram yesterday, just so you're not at any disadvantage about the paper he went to look at.
I can't remember the date. Yes, I heard that. Yes, I think there was far too much emotion in that, by the way. But, I was only listening next door. But I think what Dr. Jayaram said was all of this followed. I can't remember whether he said it was in 2017 or 2018 or whatever. I read about, this morning, Mr. Johnson mentioned my second report, where I quoted Dr. Jayaram's observations regarding the flitting abnormalities and things. If I could help.
Could I put it this way, Dr. Evans? I've asked you whether there was any conversation when you were approached by the NCA about air embolism, and you say no.
I can't remember any.
About air embolus, you say no.
I can't remember any.
Right.
Okay. I have been involved in this case. This is the 6th year. So if I've overlooked something or other, that's, but I can't remember anything. But I think to help, Mr. Myers here, I've got this. Okay. Just a minute. Wrong one. Wrong twin.
I would like to move on to baby A, but by all means, if there's something else you would like to say about this. My questions have been very simple. Did your contact at the NCA make any reference to air embolus when talking to you? Your answer, Dr. Evans, is no, isn't it?
No, not at all.